challenges Ryan Crocker's extraordinary number of ambassadorships is Tom Pickering. In fact, I lost count going through the biography. El Salvador, Jordan, Israel, Russia. I remember Russia. And then, of course, Ambassador to the United Nations under President Bush and Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs under President Clinton. He is certainly one of our most distinguished career diplomats, and he remains one of the major figures in Washington on foreign policy, American foreign, but both parties listen to. So it is an honor to have him here with his years of experience and wisdom. Mac Destler, I knew his wife, but I didn't realize it was his wife who worked for me at AID and wrote a speech for me at one point when I was the aid administrator. He is a professor at the University of Maryland, and his work on the National Security Council, his books are regarded as preeminent in the field, which is one of the reasons we invited him here to speak today. He is one of the experts in the country on this subject. So we are both honored to have these two men with us today, and our professor, Andy Ross, is going to moderate the panel. So if we could have both of you make some opening remarks and then have a conversation.
Thanks, Andrew, very much for the introduction. President and Mrs. Bush, it's an honor to be in front of you today once again, and thank you for coming. Professor Destler and Professor Ross, it's a delight to appear on the panel with you. I've been looking at and engaged in thinking about Security Council reform for the last couple of years with a small group of individuals who had developed the impression, I think through objective circumstances, that things weren't going as well as they might be, and that perhaps some institutional correction might usefully find a way forward. I think against the backdrop of that, we have done a long series of interviews with a large number of people, including some who've addressed you here today. Those interviews solidified fairly quickly into a series of concerns and a set of ideas which we are still consulting about, but think that it might be useful at some future time before it's too late, if I could put it that way, to put before the public and the campaigns. And in that regard, there's nothing new. This is done every 4 to 8 years in any event, and much of what we have seen, heard, and discovered follows a kind of general pattern. That pattern, in many ways, is very much inspired by General Scowcroft and his service as National Security Advisor for 2 presidents, one of whom is here today, and grateful to have him. My own sense is that General Scowcroft would have, I think, a good bit to say about these things, and indeed, having shared a retirement home with him for the last few months and had an opportunity to call on him a few times, I would be totally indiscreet if I said I thought that he sympathized with some of these ideas. We leave it to him to speak for himself, but I come to you in some sense of confidence that he shares the notion that the Security Council, its operation and its structure, is the centerpiece of being able to formulate effective foreign and security policy on the one hand, and secondly, that we all, I think, would agree that good people can overcome bad structure. Bad structure can't overcome good people, but good structure and good people are a better pattern than any of the other conceivable alternatives. Right. And as a result, starting from that proposition, I think there are 6 or 7 particular areas of concern, much of which reflect General Scowcroft's view. I think he would tell us that the choice of the National Security Advisor is preeminently the prerogative of the President, as indeed it should be. The highest officer in the national security structure, not subject to advice and consent by the Senate, a personal appointment of the President. I think General Scowcroft would also say to us that the NSC, as it's frequently referred to, is something that is more importantly thought of as a staff rather than as an operational organization. And these ideas, I think, filter through the concerns that we've had. I think it is possible to prepare a list of the ideal person to be the National Security Advisor. And you know, it would be pretty coterminous with General Scowcroft, whose amazing career and deep background we've heard a great deal about just a minute ago. That, I think, in a real way, reflects the kind of aspirational hopes that we have for future national security advisors, recognizing, as General Scowcroft does, that nobody is perfect and there are going to be deficiencies in some place, but you want a minimum number of deficiencies and a maximum number of, put it this way, attributes. I think first and foremost is the question of the President's confidence in the National Security Advisor, and I suppose that works both ways. The second piece is certainly somebody who brings background and experience in government and in foreign and security affairs, who knows and understands how the U.S. government is supposed to work and is not taxed with the process of learning on the job. That political astuteness, wisdom, clear judgment are all the kind of attributes that one would like to have, and certainly careful preparation and long experience are very important. Being able to say and understand how and in what way, not just to experience government, but to operate within it, is, I think, also an important attribute for the National Security Advisor. And we could go on, and I would suppose in some cases the list would perhaps make Jesus Christ a little bit embarrassed. But it is something of that kind of an approach, and indeed that sort of ambition that one has for this particularly significant and important job. Someone has to get along with the cabinet. Someone, as Steve Hadley has so beautifully told us, has to protect his boss, at the same time has to be sure that the relationships within the cabinet structure are harmonious as one can make them, and while at the same time has to promote as an honest broker the ideas of cabinet officials. A second problem, which I think is linked through the whole chain of events that, or the whole chain of items that look at the structure, is what's the purpose of the National Security Council? And there are differing views. I think fundamentally, the sense that I would carry, but I bring the optic of the State Department to this, is that it is primarily a policy-oriented organization. It is to advise and help the President make his key decisions on foreign and security policy. It is to do that, as I said a moment ago, both as an honest broker, but also, as I would put it, as an honest informer of the President. And in many ways, the National Security Advisor and the Council staff carry with them the burden and obligation of conveying to the President the differing views and the differing options that the President might consider. But I also think it is preeminently a responsibility of the National Security Advisor to have a view and to convey that view to the President, that he cannot be a Pollyanna of all options. He must be, or she must be, someone who is prepared to tell the President in those final moments before the decision, Mr. President, I've tried to convey to you sincerely what all the secretaries and agency heads think, but I want to tell you here's where I come out. And this is my reason for coming out this way, and this is the basis for the judgment. But that individual has to be prepared to understand that if the President doesn't accept that view, his loyalty and service to the President continues. Although he can or she can at a time say, Mr. President, if we're so much different in our conceptions, maybe it's time to hunt for a new one. Because in effect, that set of relationships is critically important. Those two descriptions also relate to the next piece of how to select the staff of the National Security Council. My own view is that professionalism is very important. Our Army adopted it as a way of proceeding in the awful carnage and failures of the Civil War. And that if you are like me, you certainly would have hoped, as you lived at the time that medical training evolved, that brain surgery would be high on the list of professional capacities that people would bring, if I could put it this way, to you in the operating room should you need that sort of service. And I think the same way the country its people in the state have the right to, and indeed have the requirement to demand that a National Security Council staff be professional. Professional doesn't mean that they have to have spent their entire life in government, but it does mean they know something about it and the issues and how they've been handled. It does mean as well, if they come from academia or from the press world or other places, that they have recognized credentials they bring to the table that clearly underwrite the notion that they are responsible in the views that they can convey. And the National Security Council staff has perhaps more of a role of homogenization in government views than the National Security Advisor does with the cabinet secretaries and agency heads. That's where, in fact, there might be a slight difference. The National Security National Security Advisors and the staff are not to be completely homogenizers, but in some ways the options that they prepare for decision-making have to reflect both their own broad knowledge and what the rest of the department and agencies of the government bring. But policy is the centerpiece as I see it. I think it is important here in reform of the Security Council that we do a better job in linking the money with the mouth, if I could put it that way. And that means, in effect, I think a closer working relationship with the Office of Management and Budget. And that's something that's missing, but it needs to be introduced into the process. I can recall that I was asked to head a National Security Council authorized task force to develop Plan Columbia. And we did. And then I spent 4 weeks, almost daily, with the Office of Management and Budget, justifying every figure we came up with before, in fact, it got approved as a policy piece. And that scrub was enormously valuable because anything that cost billions of dollars has to go through that kind of scrub to be presentable to the Congress and to be justified to the Congress. So those three questions, the National Security Advisor, the role of the National Security Council, and the staff, in my view, need a better scrub than they have. That takes us to question number 4, size. Size is neither a measure of efficiency nor a measure of inefficiency, but it does indicate something of what is going to be either distorted, that is, the National Security Council begins to run the operations of the government, in part because it has the time and the people and the status to be able to do so, or it in effect takes the role of being the policy formulator and the watcher of the president that the policy is being carried out. And somebody has to watch that, and it's very important. If you go over in the mission agencies and departments, it's the people who make the policies from their perspective who have to tell their secretaries it's not working. And so you have a conflict of interest in some ways. I think the conflict of interest is solved by the higher interests of the country, and everybody knows that no policy is perfect. It's a little bit like planning. Planning goes out the window the day the war starts, but planning is very important to get there, and so policy is constantly in revision. And the National Security Council should be as aware of failures as early as possible as it is aware of successes, and I think that's significant. But size is important. The present National Security Council is over 400. General Scowcroft had, I think, at the end between 50 and 75. Many of us who looked and polled people, the highest number we got was 200. The other numbers were comfortable around the Scowcroft standard. There are some technical reasons why a larger number of people might be involved, but not so much that National Security Council staff members are calling combatant commanders in the field, telling them how to deploy their troops, which is unfortunately some kind of, keeps